A man finds an old necklace on the street and feels an inexplicable connection. When he returns it to a jewelry store, he discovers a young woman with a mark identical to that of his son, who was lost decades ago. But when he dares to confess the truth to her, she decides to investigate his past and discovers something that could change their lives forever. Eduardo walked calmly through the city center, lost in his thoughts, while he observed the shop windows and the coming and going of the people around him. It was an ordinary afternoon for most people, but for him, every step was an opportunity to remember days gone by. Life had passed quickly, and now at 60 years old, nostalgia was his most constant companion. Suddenly, something shone on the ground. Eduardo stopped and crouched down to look at it more closely. There, among the crowd and the worn pavement, he found a small pendant. It was an antique necklace, with a thin chain and a delicate teardrop-shaped medallion, decorated with engravings that seemed to tell a story in its details. Touching the pendant, he felt a strange sense of warmth, as if the object was conveying a deep memory to him. It was not just a piece of jewelry, but a piece of another time, another place. Something about that necklace felt familiar, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. A fleeting image of his wife came to mind, remembering how she used to wear similar style necklaces. That simple association made him feel a slight tingle of excitement. After looking at it for a few moments, he stood up, determined to find its owner. He couldn't imagine that such a piece could have been lost through carelessness. Perhaps it belonged to someone who, like him, valued memories of the past. Without wasting any more time, Eduardo walked towards a small jewelry store he had seen a few blocks back. He remembered having passed by it on several occasions, and although he had never entered, he knew it was a reliable place in the area. The idea of returning the necklace seemed like the right thing to do. Perhaps the owners of the jewelry store could help him locate the person who had lost it. As he walked forward, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. It was strange how such a small object could stir up so many emotions. As he approached the store, his steps became slower, almost as if something inside him wanted to prolong this moment of unexpected connection. Finally, he arrived at the jewelry store. The facade was simple, but the attention to detail was evident in the window, which displayed carefully arranged pieces, each one telling its own story. Eduardo took a deep breath and opened the door, entering the place with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, with a soft melody floating in the air, accompanied by the faint sound of a wall clock marking the passage of time. Eduardo walked to the counter, where he waited for someone to serve him. As he waited, he couldn't stop looking at the necklace in his hand. The strange familiarity was still present, as if the object held a secret that he had yet to unravel. Translated from Spanish to English, www.onlinedoctranslator.com understand. Why did he feel this connection so suddenly? Was it just an illusion caused by his own desires to remember better times? After a few moments, a young woman emerged from a side door and approached the counter. Eduardo gave her a friendly smile, ready to explain his situation and return the necklace to whoever might claim it. Unbeknownst to him, that small gesture would be the beginning of something that would change his life forever. However, at that moment, Eduardo was only thinking about returning what did not belong to him. He never imagined that this simple action would lead him to discover something unexpected, a hidden connection that would tie him to his past and, perhaps, to his future. Eduardo looked at the jewelry store carefully, while the young woman behind the counter looked at him curiously. The store was small but cozy, decorated with wooden display cases that displayed antique and modern jewelry. Every detail of the place seemed carefully thought out, which gave him a feeling of confidence. The young woman approached him with a friendly smile. She was a woman in her 30s, with a deep and serene gaze. Her face radiated calm and familiarity, something that, inexplicably, made Eduardo feel comfortable. He extended his hand, showing the pendant he had found moments before. "Good afternoon," Eduardo said softly. "I found this necklace on the street near here. I thought maybe someone had lost it, and I was wondering if you could help me find the owner." The young woman examined the necklace with interest, holding it carefully between her fingers. Her eyes scanned every detail of the piece, as if she were looking for something in particular. Eduardo noticed that she seemed focused, but also surprised, as if the necklace awakened some memory in her mind. "It's an antique piece," the young woman commented. "Really beautiful. I'm surprised someone lost it like that. It seems very special." As he listened to her, Eduardo was tempted to ask more about her. There was something about her voice and her appearance that seemed strangely familiar. However, before he could say anything, his attention was drawn to a small detail on the young woman's face. On his right cheek, just below the cheekbone, there was a small birthmark, barely visible to the naked eye. Eduardo felt a shiver run through his body when he saw it. He remembered, as if it were yesterday, the words of his late wife, who always spoke of a similar mark when they imagined what their son would be like. The son they never got to meet. A flurry of emotions swept through Eduardo at that moment. Surprise, confusion, and a faint hope that he tried to hide. It couldn't be a coincidence. The mark, the necklace, the feeling of familiarity, everything seemed to indicate something that he barely dared to consider. The young woman noticed Eduardo's gaze and gave him a friendly smile, unaware of the whirlwind of thoughts he was trying to control. "Are you okay?" he asked kindly. Eduardo blinked, regaining his composure. He gave her a nervous smile and nodded, trying to calm his thoughts. Yes, sorry. I just remembered something," he replied, searching for words that wouldn't reveal the inner turmoil he was experiencing. Despite his attempts to remain calm, Eduardo could not ignore what he had just seen. The possibility, however remote, that this young woman was related to his past made him reconsider his next step. He said goodbye politely, promising to return to find out if anyone claimed the necklace. As he left the jewelry store, Eduardo carried more than just a souvenir. Something inside him told him that this meeting had not been a coincidence. Without knowing how, he was sure that he and this young woman shared a special connection that would soon begin to unravel. In the days that followed, Eduardo couldn't stop thinking about the young woman from the jewelry store. His mind kept returning to that birthmark on her cheek, to the coincidence of the necklace, and to the inexplicable familiarity he felt towards her. Finally, overcome by curiosity and a sense of duty, he decided to return to the store, hoping to find an excuse to strike up a conversation with her. When he arrived, he tried to act casual, as if he was just passing by. He entered the store and approached the counter, noticing that she was smiling at him with that same friendly expression as the first time. "Good morning," Eduardo greeted. "I didn't want to bother you. I was just passing by and thought I'd ask if anyone had claimed the necklace I brought the other day." The young woman gently shook her head, responding kindly. No one has claimed it yet," he said, displaying the necklace on the counter. "It's such a special piece that I'm surprised the owner hasn't shown up." Eduardo nodded, although deep down he knew that the necklace had only been an excuse to come back. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he decided to continue the conversation, trying to find out a little more about her. "Forgive me for being indiscreet," he said, trying hard to sound casual. "But have you worked here for a long time?" She smiled, amused by his interest, but not showing any annoyance. "I've been doing this for a few years now. I like this job, and I've always felt a special connection with antique jewelry. I feel that each piece has its own story, as if it carries with it fragments of the people who owned it." Eduardo listened attentively, feeling more and more fascinated. The young woman seemed to have a particular sensitivity, and something about her captivated him in an inexplicable way. But as they talked, a fear began to grow inside him. As he got to know her better, so did the possibility that the special connection he felt was just an illusion, a product of his own nostalgia and hopes. Aware of not wanting to scare her with his constant visits, Eduardo decided to end the conversation politely. "Thank you for your time and for keeping the necklace. I might stop by again in a few days in case someone shows up asking about it." She nodded, saying goodbye with a smile. However, as she watched him leave, there was something uneasy in her eyes, as if she were beginning to wonder about the frequency of his visits. As he walked back home, Eduardo found himself caught between hope and fear. He wanted to believe in the possibility of a real connection, but he feared he was chasing a fantasy. The emotions that were beginning to rise made him doubt himself, and he wondered if he was ready to face reality, whatever it was. But deep down, he felt he had to go back. Each visit brought him closer to the truth he sought, though he was still unsure of what he hoped to find. Despite his doubts, Eduardo returned to the jewelry store a few days later. This time, he didn't look for an excuse to talk to Carolina, the young woman who greeted him every time with a smile. As the visits became more frequent, he realized that it was her company that led him to return. The feeling of familiarity and the inexplicable bond he felt towards her were increasingly intense. Carolina, seeing him enter, smiled and greeted him with her usual kindness. Eduardo approached the counter, aware that he needed to say something different, something that would allow him to approach her in a sincere way. He cleared his throat and, after a brief pause, decided to share a little of his life with her. "You know, my wife and I used to talk about a dream we had." He began with a soft and calm voice. "We dreamed of having a child, someone we could love and guide. But circumstances were not the best, and that dream remained in our imagination." Carolina listened to him attentively, hearing in his words a mixture of nostalgia and pain. She noticed the way Eduardo chose each word, as if he wanted to protect that memory. "I'm sorry to hear that," Carolina replied with empathy in her eyes. "Sometimes life presents us with paths that we cannot change, no matter how much we want to." Eduardo nodded, impressed by her sensitivity. Even though he wouldn't admit it openly, every conversation they had made him hopeful that he had found someone special. He couldn't help but feel that, somehow, fate had put them on the same path. Determined not to make his growing interest obvious, Eduardo continued to share small details of his life, without revealing too much. He told her about his years with his wife, about the walks they used to take along the same streets where he found the necklace, and how they both dreamed of a family that never came to be. Talking about those memories made him feel lighter, as if somehow Carolina understood the weight of those years. For her part, Carolina was open and attentive. Although she found Eduardo's story touching, she also felt a slight discomfort that she could not fully explain. Each visit he made to the jewelry store aroused in her a mixture of sympathy and confusion. Although she enjoyed the conversations, she could not help but wonder what really motivated him to return. "And you?" Eduardo asked with a friendly smile. "Do you have family nearby or someone you share your days with?" Carolina seemed surprised by the question, but answered honestly. "My parents live in another city. I don't have any siblings, so I grew up as an only child. Maybe that's why I appreciate so much the connections I manage to make with the people I meet." Eduardo nodded, noticing that Carolina's words resonated deeply with him. It was as if, through their experiences, they managed to create a unique connection, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. When Eduardo said goodbye that afternoon, he left the jewelry store with a mixture of emotions. Despite the uncertainty that surrounded him, there was something inside him that drove him to keep going. Maybe, he thought, the answers he was looking for were closer than he imagined, hidden in every conversation he shared with Carolina. As Eduardo continued to visit the jewelry store, Carolina began to notice a pattern in his visits. Although she liked his company and enjoyed the conversations, she couldn't ignore the frequency with which he appeared in the store. Each time he entered, he brought with him a mix of warmth and nostalgia, but also a curiosity that began to unsettle her. Carolina began to wonder if Eduardo's visits had a purpose beyond the stories they shared. He always had an excuse, whether it was the necklace or some other casual comment. However, the intensity of his interest and the way he looked at her sometimes made her feel uncomfortable, as if there was something more he wasn't telling her. One afternoon, after one of their regular conversations, Carolina decided she could no longer ignore her doubts. She knew Eduardo was kind and respectful, but she felt she had to protect herself. Something in her instinct told her there was more behind those constant visits, and she didn't want to let her own emotions cloud her judgment. When Eduardo arrived that afternoon, she greeted him with a smile, but her eyes reflected a determination he had not seen before. After a brief exchange of words, Carolina took a deep breath and decided to confront him in a subtle way. "Eduardo, I've noticed that you come to the jewelry store frequently," she said, trying to sound casual but direct. "I don't want to sound suspicious, but is there a special reason why you always come back?" The question took Eduardo by surprise. During his visits, he had tried to be careful, conscious of not wanting to invade Carolina's space. However, he hadn't considered the impact his constant visits could have on her. Eduardo was silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. He knew he had to be honest. but he also felt that the truth might scare her or make her walk away. Knowing that Carolina deserved an explanation, Eduardo spoke honestly, though without fully revealing his thoughts. "You're right," she admitted, her tone calm. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. The truth is that meeting you and talking to you has brought back memories of my past life, of important moments that I thought were lost. Somehow being here and talking to you helps me remember and process those emotions." Carolina listened to him attentively, although there was still a hint of doubt in her gaze. She appreciated his honesty, but she felt that there was something deeper, something he didn't dare to fully say. However, she decided not to press him further at that moment. "I understand," he replied with a slight smile. "I was just a little surprised by the frequency of your visits, but I appreciate you sharing it with me." Eduardo nodded, grateful for her understanding. He knew he would have to be more careful from now on, although his desire to get to know her better remained intact. As Carolina said goodbye to him that afternoon, a feeling of unease lingered inside her. Even though Eduardo's words had been sincere, something told her that there were still unanswered questions. And as he walked out of the jewelry store, she wondered if she was ready to find out what he was really looking for. After their last meeting, Eduardo felt that the time had come to be completely honest with Carolina. He couldn't ignore the connection he felt towards her, or the persistent intuition that there was something in common between them, something that went beyond coincidences. He knew that if he wanted to find answers, he had to open up to her and trust that she would understand his intentions. Determined, he waited a few days before returning to the jewelry store. This time, he didn't try to make excuses or act casual. He entered with a firm step and a serenity that made him seem determined. Carolina received him as always, but her expression reflected a certain reserve. Perhaps she was expecting a different conversation than the previous ones. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Eduardo took a deep breath and decided that the time had come to talk. "Carolina, I have been coming here frequently because I feel that there is something important that I must tell you. Something that I have carried with me for years, and now knowing you, I think it is time to share it." She looked at him, expectant but also cautious. Eduardo, feeling the weight of her words, continued. "Many years ago, my wife and I dreamed of having a family, but circumstances were not easy. We had a son we never got to meet, someone who, due to circumstances beyond our control, was taken from us when he was just a baby." Carolina looked at him with a mixture of surprise and disbelief, not knowing exactly how to respond. Eduardo noticed her expression and tried to calm her down with his calm voice. "I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but there's something about you that reminds me deeply of that son I lost. The birthmark on your face. It's identical to the one my wife described every time she talked about our son. That mark and the way I feel a connection to you has led me to believe that maybe you could be that person we always dreamed of finding." Carolina, still in shock from what she had just heard, remained silent. For a moment, the possibility that it was true invaded her strongly, awakening a series of contradictory emotions inside her. However, the fear of getting her hopes up was also present, and she did not want to get carried away without knowing more. "I'm not saying it's true," Eduardo clarified, trying to ease the tension in the air. "It's just a hunch, a feeling that's been with me since I met you. I know it may sound strange, and I understand if you don't want to talk about it anymore." Carolina, still digesting his words, took a deep breath and searched for an honest answer. "I don't know what to say, Eduardo. The idea of you being my father is too big, but I can't deny that I also feel something special with you, something I haven't felt with other people." Although the uncertainty was palpable, Carolina felt an unexpected need to discover more about her own past. If there was a chance, however small, that Eduardo's words were true, she needed to find out. Without making any promises, Carolina told him that she would consider researching her family history. Despite her doubts, she felt that she should explore the path that Eduardo had revealed to her, even though she did not know where it would lead her. That night, Carolina found herself in her small apartment, her mind filled with thoughts and emotions that she couldn't organize. The conversation with Eduardo had awakened in her something she had never before considered, the possibility that her family history was different from what she had always believed. Although the idea of being adopted seemed remote, Eduardo's story and her own emotions prompted her to investigate. After hours of reflection, he decided to start with the basics, reviewing family documents that he kept in a small box, along with other belongings from his childhood. There were some old photographs, certificates, and papers that his parents had given him when he was younger. As he pulled out the documents, his heart pounded, fearing what he might find. Among the papers, he found his birth certificate, a document he had always taken for granted. He took it in his hands, looking at every detail carefully. Although there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary, something caught his attention. The date of issue was later than his date of birth. The difference was a few months, something he had never noticed until that moment. That small discrepancy raised more doubts in Carolina. If everything was as her parents had told her, why would there be such a difference in the dates? Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, she decided to look through other documents. She continued searching through the box until she found a letter, apparently old, that she had never seen before. The letter was handwritten and appeared to be addressed to her parents. In it, an unknown person described an adoption process. Carolina read the words in disbelief, feeling how each line confirmed the possibility that her origins were different from what she had always believed. The words, "We appreciate your decision to give the little girl a loving home," echoed in her mind, shattering the certainty of her entire life. The shock of the revelation was so profound that she had to sit down. The reality of being adopted, of her parents having hidden this truth from her, left her in a state of shock. Everything she had believed until then seemed to be shaking before her, and Eduardo's words took on new meaning. Could he really be her biological father? Carolina spent the rest of the night in tears and confused memories. She thought about her childhood, about the love her parents had given her, but also about the lack of information about her first months of life. Why had they never told her? What had led them to keep that secret for so long? As she processed the situation, she remembered Eduardo's words about his lost son and the birthmark that united them. She couldn't ignore the connection they had both felt, nor Eduardo's desire to find someone he had lost so many years ago. The next morning, Carolina looked in the mirror and noticed the small mark on her cheek, the one that had gone unnoticed by her for years, and that now seemed to be a crucial piece in the puzzle of her life. The idea that the man she had met by chance at the jewelry store could be her real biological father filled her with mixed emotions, but also with renewed determination. Determined to get to the bottom of the truth, Carolina promised herself that she would confront her adoptive parents to get answers. She needed to understand her story, know her roots, and find peace with the truth that she now felt forced to face. Despite the pain that overwhelmed her, she knew she had to move forward. The question was no longer whether she was willing to discover the truth, but whether she was ready to face the consequences of that discovery. With her heart pounding, Carolina headed to her adoptive parents' house. Despite the love and respect she had always felt for them, a feeling of mistrust and uncertainty now filled her. The revelations from the documents she had found the night before continued to echo in her mind, and she knew that only they could give her the answers she needed. When she arrived, she was greeted warmly, as always. Her mother hugged her, not noticing the nervousness Carolina was trying to hide. However, as soon as they sat down in the living room, Carolina decided she could not keep putting off the conversation. With a mixture of determination and fear, she took a deep breath and began. "Mom, Dad, there's something important I need to ask you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found some documents last night, and I don't think I've learned the whole truth about my past." Her parents exchanged looks of surprise and concern. Carolina noticed the nervousness in their eyes, a reaction that made her feel like she was on the right track. Gently, she continued. "Is it true that I was adopted?" she asked, hoping for an answer that could change the relationship she had had with them all her life. His mother, visibly shaken, looked down and took her husband's hand. After a brief silence, it was his father who spoke. "Carolina, we have always loved you as our daughter. You are and will always be part of our family. But yes, it is true. We adopted you when you were just a baby." Carolina felt a mixture of relief and pain. Although she already suspected the truth, hearing it directly from them gave her a sense of closure and at the same time loss. Her mother, with tears in her eyes, tried to explain. "We never wanted to hurt you or make you feel different. We were afraid that if you knew the truth, you might feel like you didn't belong in our family, that you might somehow become estranged from us." Her mother's words revealed genuine love, but also an insecurity that had led her to keep this secret for all those years. Carolina, although still in shock, understood the reasons behind her adoptive parents' decision. It was not easy for them to face this truth, and seeing the pain in their eyes reminded her of the love and care they had given her. "It's not that I don't feel like part of the family," Carolina said softly, "but I need to understand who I am, where I come from. There is someone who could be my biological father, and I feel it is my duty to find out the truth." Her parents nodded, their eyes showing support. Despite her fear, they understood her need to search for her roots. Her father, taking her hand, said, "Carolina, whatever the outcome, you will always be our daughter. We will support you in everything you need." Touched by their words, Carolina felt a deep gratitude towards them. Although the path to the truth would be difficult, knowing that she had their support gave her the strength to continue. She knew that no matter what she encountered, she would always have a home to return to. After getting answers from her adoptive parents, Carolina felt ready to face Eduardo. Over the past few weeks, she had gone from disbelief to acceptance of a possibility she never imagined, that the man she had met at the jewelry store could be her biological father. However, there were still questions that needed answers and emotions that needed to be sorted out. She met Eduardo at a nearby cafe. When he arrived, she felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. He greeted her with a cautious smile, aware that this meeting would be different from the previous ones. After exchanging a few trivial words, Carolina decided to get straight to the point. "Eduardo, I've been looking into my past. My adoptive parents confirmed that I was adopted as a baby. And although this is new to me, I can't help but think that what you said could be true, that you and I have a connection." Eduardo listened in silence, absorbing every word. His eyes reflected a mixture of joy and sadness, as if each revelation Carolina made brought him both relief and regret. He knew he had to be careful with his words, but he also understood that she needed absolute honesty. "Carolina, for a long time I lived in the hope of finding my son, but after so many years, I gave up. When I met you, something in me awakened that hope. However, I know that I have arrived late and that I have no right to ask anything of you." Eduardo's words resonated in Carolina's heart. Although his story touched her, she also felt a need to protect herself, to not let an illusion take control of her emotions. Even though the evidence seemed to point to a shared truth, she still needed clarity on what Eduardo really expected of her. "I understand what you're saying, Eduardo," she replied softly, "but I don't want you to get your hopes up. I don't know how I should feel in this situation. I'm not even sure what all this means. I just know that I feel conflicted between the desire to meet you and the fear of discovering something that could change me forever." Eduardo nodded, understanding her doubts. The last thing he wanted was to hurt her or force her into a relationship she didn't want. Knowing that he could only offer her his understanding, he made a difficult but necessary decision. "Carolina, I don't expect you to accept anything right away. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'll always be willing to listen to you. I can't make up for lost time, but I can give you the space and freedom to decide what you want without pressure." The sincerity in his words touched Carolina's heart. She knew that, despite his doubts, Eduardo was willing to accept whatever she chose, even if it meant keeping his distance. With a slight smile, Carolina nodded, feeling that this moment was the beginning of a new stage, one in which she would have the power to decide her own path. They said goodbye, agreeing to take the necessary time before defining the direction of their relationship. They both knew that, regardless of the outcome, this meeting had marked the beginning of something special. Carolina spent the next few days in deep reflection. The conversation with Eduardo had led her to explore her feelings, to question her identity, and to rethink what it meant to her to have a family bond. Although doubts persisted, a part of her felt a genuine connection with him, a feeling that went beyond words and memories. After all, they both shared something unique, something that deserved to be explored slowly, but with an open heart. Finally, she decided to take the next step. She didn't want her relationship with Eduardo to be a mere coincidence or an anecdote from the past. She felt she could build something real, something that, although it wouldn't replace lost time, would allow her to discover a part of herself that had remained hidden until now. She picked up her phone and sent him a short but meaningful message. "Would you like to have coffee this weekend?" She knew that this invitation was more than a casual date. It was a chance to start something new, a kind of reconciliation with her own past and, perhaps, with her future. Eduardo responded almost immediately, accepting with a contained joy that she perceived in his words. On the agreed day, they met in a quiet cafe where the atmosphere invited calm and conversation. They both sat down, this time without the tension of their first encounters. Now the silence between them was comfortable, full of a tacit understanding that only those who have shared deep experiences can understand. "Thank you for inviting me, Carolina," said Eduardo with a serene smile. "You don't know how much it means to me that you want to continue getting to know me." Carolina smiled, nodding slowly. She knew that words were unnecessary at that moment. She had made the decision to give this relationship a chance, to allow something new to blossom in her life. However, she also knew that everything had to go slowly, without forcing feelings or expectations. During that conversation, they talked about simple topics, shared stories from their daily lives, and began to build a complicity based on small details. Eduardo. He told her more about his youth, about the passions he had cultivated over the years, and Carolina was surprised to discover how much they had in common. As the hours passed, the feeling of comfort grew. They both understood that this coffee was not just a meeting, it was the first step towards a relationship that they were both willing to nurture. They knew that the road would not be easy, that facing the past would require time and patience, but they also knew that they were willing to try. As they said goodbye, Eduardo looked at her with gratitude and a tenderness that she clearly perceived. "I don't want to rush you or impose anything on you, Carolina. I just want you to know that I'm here, ready to support you and build whatever you decide. Whatever the future holds, I'm grateful to have found you." Carolina nodded excitedly, feeling an unexpected peace. That meeting had been the beginning of something new, an opportunity to heal and build a bond that, although it had come late, had the power to change their lives. They said goodbye with the promise of seeing each other again, knowing that this reunion was not the end, but the beginning of a story that had yet to be written. Sometimes life surprises us with unexpected connections that lead us to question who we are and where we come from. Eduardo and Carolina teach us that, although lost time cannot be recovered, it is always possible to build new bonds based on love and understanding. What would you have done in Carolina's place? Would you have dared to discover your past no matter what you might find? To continue this moving story of self-discovery and explore how every decision can redefine our sense of belonging, click on the video that appears on the screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more stories that inspire us to know ourselves better and value our roots. Thank you for joining us on this story.